Morning, how's everybody doing? Thank you for being here. I think that first keynote got everybody laughing and having a good time, and hope we can continue. I want to thank you all for being here, and just want to tell you guys a little bit about myself. I guess I'm really short here, so let me move this forward a little bit. So I come from Connecticut, and as some of you may know, Connecticut is Algonquin for Long Tidal River. Hartford's the capital. It's located precariously on the riverbanks, depends on dikes and a misplaced highway to keep the city from flooding. About 20 some odd years ago, let me escape on this. About 20 years ago, before direct deposit was widely accepted, I was promoted to operations manager. I had a perfectly good job as a systems programmer, but got the responsibility. The city's data center, which was housed in the basement of the ancient former Hartford Times newspaper building. Our biggest mandate was to produce weekly paychecks for the sworn law enforcement and public safety staff, so we didn't want to mess up. Every Friday, our IT director, who hadn't had a say in that location, drilled us relentlessly to be prepared in case of emergency. One Monday, our network folks saw some water seeping out from under a locked utility closet door. When the maintenance heaved the door open, it unleashed a flood of chilled water from a burst pipe that ran through the buildings in the downtown area. This was not a drill. We mobilized our away team, our backup tapes and forms and procedure manuals to a recovery site in Philadelphia. And Philly was our home for the week, and by golly, we performed flawlessly to restore, generate and print checks, and run the new backups for the return trip. Friday morning, the van was loaded with media and boxes of continuous forms that had to be put through the check signer back in town when delivered as expected. The courier and I were concentrating on our navigation map through the hot summer streets when I heard a flapping noise and turned to see the check stock catching air and wafting towards the open windows. I dove spread eagle to stop the mayhem, and we laughed for miles as I refolded the perforation to make sure that the checks stayed together. We rolled back into town that day feeling like heroes, and our director garnered respect for her foresight. About a year later, the data center suffered another physical emergency. This event coincided with Chicago's major flood, so Hartford couldn't use the recovery site. It was already full. We'd proved direct deposit was reliable for payroll, so all we needed to do was generate an electronic file and send it via modem. Society's confidence in our networks has evolved to total cyber dependence. So let's hear from our panel of experts what can go wrong now. I'd like to introduce our panel. Glen Carson, Agency Information Security Officer with the State of California Resources Agency. Mr. Bill Billings, CISO, Federal HP Enterprise Security, CISSP, Hewlett-Packard Company. And Mr. Gary Coverdale, Assistant Chief Information Officer and Chief Information Security Officer, CISSP, County of Napa, California. So we wanted to run through some more modern day assumptions and how maybe we can convince the business people to understand some of the assumptions that they're making and frame them in terms of a real, what's going on in cyber today. So let me just get this clicker going. So, cyber events that can kick you in the continuity plan. First part of business continuity planning is to identify important services, discuss the scenarios that could interrupt your day and interrupt the serenity of your day, create a strategic plan for alternative ways to provide important services, and then test and maintain the plan. These aren't always comfortable subjects, and as we know, people aren't always on the same page with it. So we want to think about some assumptions that maybe business people make and why they would want to ignore things because they think that certain problems can just be minimized or swept under the rug. One of the first assumptions we have is we only need business continuity if a meteorite falls on our data center. Would one of our panel members like to start?
I'd like to start. Seeing as Napa just got hit by an earthquake, the business continuity situation wasn't so bad, but it was very well played in the newspaper, so it wasn't a real impact. However, a cyber attack, if you look at every session in this event here, these last 2 days, every session could affect your business continuity. So if you look at those areas and correlate them back to providing services to your customer base, you can and will be affected. And those types of events do not play well in the newspaper politically. So that impact is very, very prominent, especially with moving over to the cloud, with the issues with the cloud and those opportunities to be an attack vector out there. So I wanted to throw that out right off the bat.
Yeah, I would say also is that from a continuity perspective, one size does not fit all. Right? A lot of the business folks will say, to Mary's point, right? Well, I only have to worry a meteor falls on the data center. Well, sure you do. What are the chances of that happening, right? So as the security folks in that discussion, we have to provide that perspective, right? What is the risk, and what does that value mean to them? It could be, from a meteor, chance of that happening, or what I don't know, couldn't even swag it right
Billions
now.
to 1.
Chance of it happening, right? As far as, how about the power grid going down? Right? There was some speculation last week on that the power grid was fragile enough, the fragility of it was enough that you could take the power grid down, a bad actor could take the power grid down of the U.S. What's the likelihood of that happening? Since then, it's been pushed back. It probably couldn't happen, but it maybe happen if you did a multiple attacks towards multiple different places. So we, as the security folks, have to weigh that risk, the appropriate risk, right? And then I am also the big guy that always is. We can't approach the problem with the business folks as a FUD problem. Everybody know what FUD is? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt, right? And in security, we live by FUD, unfortunately. Right? So you have to back it up with stats. You've got to back up your position with the statistics to prove out this is why it can or cannot happen, or the likelihood of it can or cannot happening. So once again, all emergencies are not measured in the same. There's different flavors of it, and you have to apply accordingly to each one.
I would like to add that the business continuity plans are generally written for 30 days. After about 15 days, you've settled down enough to where you can start planning for anything future of that. But the continuity plan being written for 30 days doesn't mean that it's not good for anything shorter. I mean, what happens if a generator's fuel tank on your roof starts leaking and you have a hazmat coming down through there with diesel fuel coming down through 5 floors of your building, which recently happened to one of the departments in the agency that I work for. The people were out of the building. They had 5 days, but they had a continuity plan so that they could go ahead and figure out where they were going to work and continue their operations. Say that you're in a building where they're doing some remodeling above you and they break a water main. Flood your file room. Not everybody is totally digitized, so a flooded file room could really interrupt your operations and cause you a problem, continuity of business. So these kind of things, are actually covered by a continuity business plan, even though they're not. The plan is for 30 days. It is effective even in the short run. So temporary outages need to be planned for, and your business continuity plan is right there for you. If you have a plan and you have practice, then you have a roadmap of what needs to be done, so you can adjust and keep on going.
And let's speak to the conundrum here with the ransomware, though. The human user gets lured into clicking a link and an evil program holds their files for ransom. This was not a physical threat. It was from inside. There was maybe a sense of awareness, but maybe they didn't even know. Maybe they were tricked into it. So that's the kind of continuity as well that I think the theme that is running through this entire symposium is, when are we going to detect it? And what are we going to do to stay in business? How can we isolate this and still keep our front-facing posture with the business and keep things going. So we did hear there are incidents where people don't believe the ransom. They're not going to pay the ransom. And then all of a sudden, the next thing you know, their files do indeed implode and they can no longer get to them. So let's go on to another of our assumptions. Here we are. With the CryptoLocker and ransomware, you must depend on your business continuity backup and recovery plan. So here we were with a threat on our operating system, and we got some information that we were having ransom, but where was that backup? Now, we want to think about the fact that if you are replicating your data, you're replicating the same bad data over to other places. So there may be checkpoints that you need to take in order to seal off when that showed up on your system. So it's important that we take that kind of preventive care. Again, this was not an external threat that we had.
Another thing I might add to that is that most of us, or a lot of us, wind up storing data on a PC at your desk. These are not normally backed up. So, one preventative measure would be to ensure that everybody's using a home drive, a network drive for the storage of their data. These are usually backed up. So therefore, you may have a chance to recover if you haven't backed up some ransomware also. And like she said, you have to have a recovery point. But with PCs, there's generally not a recovery point to go to. You've lost it.
Yeah, and it's hard to do those kind of policies and enforce them when people want to have their own clutches of data or when they're doing their own systems, even within an application service.
The point is on the individuals, your business continuity plan should include individual clients as well as the enterprise itself. And the other point I want to make is certainly practice your restoration of your tape backups. A lot of agencies do not do that, and they're surprised.
And specific on the client side, and from a corporate standpoint, is I have to be able to provide that backup ability. Right. So by policy sets that everybody should, doesn't mean that they all do. So if you as an individual view that your data that's on your PC is important, then we have to provide that service for you to be able to back that up. But it's also to say there are some key individuals throughout the company that are mandatorily backed up, executives being one of them, right? So usually senior VPs and above, all of the machines are automatically backed up.
So, we are not eBay or Amazon, so we don't depend on internet services. Does anybody here, some of you may not be as mature as I am, but remember when DOS was just disk operating system? There was no okay, denial of service. That was really, something that took us out of our comfort zones. And when we have a denial of service, the computer network gets flooded. This we want to be able to explain to our executives. They don't understand. We're not talking about water flooding this now. We're talking about a pipe that is just too small to send the data, and now we have the inability to be able to do any communications whatsoever. And hacktivists, although internet may be just, we think of it as just a web app that's always going to be available, the cyber teams that work to disrupt service can ruin your business reputation. And if you're not available, any of these, not only a retail business, but with our state government, the collections and the reputation of finding information easily on our websites is really, really important to us. So I apologize for not having timed this correctly because the screensaver keeps kicking on. So let's hear some other comments and anecdotes about this kind of figuring that we don't depend on internet services.
Well, I don't want to name any names, but I'm associated with multiple counties that have been hit by DDoS and also by Anonymous. Thank God Napa hasn't, but it's just a matter of time as far as I'm concerned. As soon as we get our names in the newspaper for something nefarious like kicking out transients or something, we'll get hit by Anonymous. But you need to have a good, quick response team for those DDoS events. And that means calling your state CISO and calling MSISAC a 24-hour basis and getting them involved within minutes of the DDoS. As soon as you think that something is happening, bring in the heavy hitters, and they'll clean you up, help you clean up, and resolve the DDoS attack. And as well with the anonymous hacktivist situation, the FBI will come in and go sit side by side with you and help you recover from that quickly. Certainly, we're not eBay. We're not dependent upon a huge revenue stream, but politically we're connected. And when our websites go down, it's front page newspaper, and it's just as damaging as a $1 million eBay revenue stream coming in. And I did mention earlier cloud services. eBay and Amazon's dependent upon the cloud. We are migrating towards the cloud for more and more services, and that'll take down your business activity too. So be aware of that and have a good recovery strategy.
I would say from a web presence, I can't deal with it, right, from a DDoS perspective. I don't have the resources, both internally as well as the people, as well as the right resources. So I depend on my providers, my big provider. That was both in the federal government as well as I'll remain nameless, a large software company, I'll leave it at that. Their web presence, all their downloads and everything that you ever get from them come from a third party. Looks like the company, but it's actually provided by somebody else. And why is that? Is because the risk of DDoS and the risk of being attacked was far too great for them to be able to support that and have the resources to build that out. It's handed off to the professionals. Right? Let them deal with it. And you serve that issue through your SLAs, the agreements in your contract, to ensure that your system always will stay up and how you manage that. So instead of manage it directly, you manage it through SLAs with your provider. And I would add, just to Gary's point, if you can, you guys correct me if I'm wrong, is add in the provider. You have to have that conversation with your provider as well. Right?
You have to have relationships already built before the event, not during the event, but well before the events happen, whether it is an earthquake or whether it's a cyber attack. Build those relationships. Without those relationships, you're going to be floundering, and that's both private and public.
I think to bring business continuity is something that you can plan for. You can plan for having those contacts, for having those names and phone numbers and email addresses that you'll have to contact in the event of a DDoS. You're going to have to be able get out there onto social media and tell people what's happening. You're going to have to get ahead of it, or try to anyway. As we heard in the simulation yesterday, they kept trying to figure out, what are we going to release to the media? How do we release it? Maybe you don't have access from your office and you have to go home and do the releases of that. But all these things can be planned for in your business recovery plan. You can go ahead and probably have some sample news releases or some templates for news releases, and already filled in with the addresses of who you need to get these to. So, and once you've built up your relationships, you can get these out there and they'll be published for you immediately and quickly. But part of your business plan, your resumption plan, is to protect your reputation too.
And on those points, right, just go no further than Target, right? Target just released their CEO, the board got rid of their CEO because of their issue, right? So you've got to bring that discussion internally as well to your director at that level, because it will involve them as well. And as much as we in the security community have never done it before, we've got to get ahead of the problem. If you don't get ahead of it, it will get ahead of you and heads will begin to roll. So we have got to get ahead of those sort of problems.
I think the one thing that we did see from the war game that they had yesterday was it was really, it was turned inward in terms of how is IT and security and communications going to deal with this. But their business could have played a bigger role. They already had a call center set up. So what would they have done if it had been a true business problem that wasn't IT? What if something else had happened? How could they have leveraged that call center? So we really want to lay out all the alternatives that you have and what those plans would be, taking into account. You're trying to help the business out of a jam here. It may be, an information breach or a denial of service, but what other avenues, what other media methods do we have to communicate to our stakeholders, to our employees, to our customers, and really get everybody at the table from the beginning? And I think, like a presentation like this can help you really from an objective viewpoint, instead of us always being the ones, this could happen, where people are really given the opportunity to make some determinations on their own and really brainstorm some of the alternatives that we may not be thinking of in purely just a data sense. So let's go on to the next assumption. We're just a small entity, so who's going to attack us? Who wants to take that on?
Look at the city of Ferguson. I believe there were about 27,000 population. They had an event, and the city and the county, outside of the police department, of course, were unrelated to that event. Yet they were the ones that have to deal with anonymous attacking them. They're currently attacking them left and right, and just creaming them with cyber attack activity. You get your name in the newspaper, and it's socially impacting. You will get attacked by anonymous, regardless of how big you are. And the smaller you are, you're probably going to be hurt more significantly by that event. So the event could be a front page newspaper that they're kicking out all the transients in a particular park. Or a police shooting that may or may not be justified, but who anonymous really doesn't care. They jump at that reaction, and so on and so forth. Any kind of event that is negative can open the door to be attacked. So prepare for it and expect it, because tonight when you go to bed, there may be an event in your city, however insignificant, that gets front page news, and they'll be knocking at your door in 2 hours.
I would say that, you're a small entity and you don't feel like you're going to be attacked. Well, there's small hackers out there too that have to build a reputation up. And until they've gotten recognized, got their street cred or whatever, they can't join the big groups. They can't rent the big botnets or whatever, so they've got to start somewhere. But also you might consider, in your business continuity plan, what are your connections? Is your Barney Fife Police Department out there connected to the CLETS police database? Are they connected to a DMV? Are these back doors that could be opened by a hacker to come through your small entity to step into the next one? So with your business continuity plan, you want to be ready to notify these people that, hey, we've been hacked, and maybe they're tunneling through our VPN to DMV or whatever, or to state controller's office. So you may have to contact them. You may have to know who to contact immediately and be able to get a hold of them very quickly, and not sit around fumbling around trying to call a friend someplace and say, oh, well, who's the ISO at the state controller's office or whatever. You need that information. You need those contacts. If you have connections with somebody, you have to have the contacts and have those in your business continuity plan.
Yeah, just to pile on that same point is the overused term of APT, Advanced Persistent Threat, right? Another name for a sophisticated attacker, is if I can get into your network, regardless if you're big, small, or medium size, I may sit in your network for some period of time and not impact you at all. But if I can get to somebody else, that, to his point is, if I want to get in DMV, if I want to get other resources, I'm going to use the relationship that you have from a network level with that other agency, and I'll exploit it. Right? We've been seeing that since the early 80s. If you remember Clifford Stoll's Cuckoo's Egg, right? That whole map is agency-to-agency relationships that were existing. By getting in by one simple vulnerability and then exploiting the entire system just because of the relationships.
Well, look at Target. They went in through a air conditioning connection.
That's right.
It wasn't directly into Target. It was somebody that was connected to the network. And they got in there and did some real damage. still paying for that damage.
When I heard about that, I made a call back to my folks in Connecticut that I delayed for 6 months while they were getting their environmental monitoring system on our network. And I said, no, we're going to VLAN this because you folks are not going to get into our network this way. And it caused a little grief, but I felt that it was really important to give my network people enough time to organize the network the way it should be and not just satisfy someone's need because it was easier for everybody and more expeditious to allow them to do that. And I called them up and I was like, look at how that paid off. You know, now we know, you know how to do that now. And it was really worth the time and effort to make sure that on that little segment that we knew exactly what was connected to it. We don't place enough emphasis on our topology diagrams. We leave a lot of assumptions made. We do it that one time to get through a project. We do a small diagram with a couple of endpoints on it and some connections. And then when we really need it and we have to explain it to our executives, we don't have something to gather around the table and say, here's what we're hitting. I think the point that has been made with with our internet service providers, that's another thing. We look at this service, we see it go out a router somewhere and we're paying the bill, but really, do we know where it's going? We could be in a central office, a switching point somewhere that is vulnerable. We could be in the basement of a building somewhere with our fiber and not even know. So it's really important to know where your connections are, where your breakpoints are. And I would emphasize, especially if other people, you're depending on them for service. You think that this is going to happen. They could be just as vulnerable as we are if we're running it on premise. So I think it's really important that we make friends not only with our business associates on the outside, but that all our network people, that we know them well and we understand their roles and how they would do a diagnosis and the time that they need to arrange to do the research it takes to protect some things and not just make sure things are running. So let's go on.
Well, I was just going to say, I think these kind of things are things that show up when you start doing due diligence in your technology recovery and business continuity plans. You'll examine these things and you'll put that type of stuff into your plan. So you've got it available, you know where your connections are, you know what your network looks like, and you have all those things readily available to reference.
I was going to say, in my quarterly business reviews, so I go through every quarter, we go through all the lines of business within security, the information security program, and that's one of the questions we talk about is, do you have the relationships? Who are the right people? And more times than not, unfortunately, it's happened a couple times and now it's not happened as many. I'll make a phone call. Give me the list. Make a phone call. Well, that person doesn't work here anymore. Oh, really? Then you go back to the person who owns that and figure out why. Right? You need to have those relationships. Those relationships are very important. Go out for lunch. Take them out for lunch. Go out to breakfast. Meet for coffee. Something like that, to establish that level of relationship so that when the proverbial blank hits the fan, you've got somebody you can trust and go to.
So, and just another thing to add on that, another tip about our information sharing agreements. We need to know our topology, but many times information sharing begins as something that's just a pilot. We want to get an extract from somewhere, see how that's going to play into how we can use that data. And relationships are forged easily. I'll just send you the file, it's no big deal. And then the next thing we know, they've been using it for production for quite a while, and oftentimes the business people have said, I don't know, I just click on the shortcut and it's just there for me. And then one day it hasn't been refreshed and there's a scramble to find out whose system broke, why didn't this run, who do we call for troubleshooting and diagnosis, how bad do we need that now? So again, if you're finding out that you're getting extracts or sharing data or commingling data because you need it and how that data is getting manipulated, you want to make sure you have that up front and do that research with your business people. So let's see, we went on to, we're just a little city. Cyber attackers go after national sites, don't they?
I would say, again, they got to start somewhere. So the little cities are just as susceptible to being hit as the national whatevers, the Department of Defense, the White House, the whatever type of thing. So, you know, you've got to be prepared and expect somebody to be trying to hit you. And like Gary keeps saying, if your name ever shows up in the news, you know who's going to be trying to hit you. You know, Anonymous is out there just trying to raise all kinds of cane with everything we've got. So when you're putting together your plan, think about these contingencies and plan for it. Practice what you've got in your plan to mitigate these types of situations. You may not plan for the exact situation, but you have practiced to where the people know the different steps that need to be taken through your business continuity plan to preserve your reputation or reclaim it, whatever. But you're out there, you've already thought about some of the things, and all of a sudden you've got to modify your plan, but it's easier to modify a plan than it is to go by the seat of your pants and try to plan things as you're moving.
The other thing is, there's scans out there that are scanning everybody's environments as we speak, and you have front-facing applications, GIS and content managing systems like Ectron, and there have been known cases that 25, 30 small agencies and cities and counties have been used as a vector attack to a state on unpatched or non-updated Ectron servers out there for content management. So don't be a vector for somebody else either. Stay patched, especially your public-facing servers and all that, including in your DMZ.
Yeah, I'll just chime in. I guess I look at the problem from a different perspective. I look at the problem from, I would never go after, if I was an attacker, I wouldn't go after the big guys, right? It's too hard. You go after the small guys, right? You don't have the resources, limited resources, both in people and money. If I can go after multiple small sites, say if you went to every small government agency in the state of California, could I create a lot of chaos to your constituents? Could have called in a lot of question about the state government because I've gone after all these individual sites. So you have to think it from that perspective. Yes, you have limited resources, but you have to put your perspective into the broader understanding of what is the potential of the impact that you could provide when your system goes down.
When you think about how people are developing websites, and just about every page you hit has something that says contact us. And that'll bring you right into your own email system with an inbound email address that's going to go right into that site. So even those programming techniques in terms of where is that email going, could they really literally flood your email system by allowing that to happen? Or are there rules set up that would not allow multiple messages from, say, the same sender? So programming techniques that will save the stability of your systems, and maybe even being able to switch over to just a dummy site if you do think that you're being hacked, where you will have just a regular internet presence, but there would be no way in, so that at least it looks like people would say, well, I couldn't contact you, but it looked like their site was still up. Again, that's kind of a reputation saver, and it's important for people that are developing those web apps to, again, get the training that they need to make sure that they can cover those situations that could occur if you're allowing people to ask you for information and literally log on or just flood your website with inbound traffic. So, here's my favorite. Our IT folks are great at fixing things. They should be able to lock our systems down without spending any more money. This is common because we don't speak the same language. People do not understand what the technology, we just spent, thousands of dollars to upgrade to Windows 7. Why is it still not secure? Why do I need an intrusion protection system now? What more can you possibly explain to me that we need for these systems? It never seems to end. And sometimes to justify the cost benefit is very difficult because IT is in the world of putting out fires and doing those patches. And if they don't have a good, strong representative that is going to be able to speak at the executive level and make those budget statements and do some proof of concepts and show that these tools really work, then it's a real challenge to, as it is with business continuity, to justify the expense of the testing and the training and the additional equipment that we might need.
The really big question here is, how much is your reputation worth? Not so much the data. Data can be replaced, but reputations are built over time. Reputations can be torn down in a minute. Are you going to spend enough to protect your reputation? Is there enough money to protect your reputation? Your IT department is trying to protect your data, so what is it worth? You have to try to quantify these things before you can ever figure out whether you're going to spend money or whether you're not going to spend money. You don't spend $10 million trying to correct a $10,000 problem. Maybe the government does, the U.S. government, but state government doesn't have that kind of money. So you also look at the amount of risk you're ready to accept. If it's a small problem, it's a small risk, you may not need to spend as much money. But still, you've got to look at what your reputation is worth. And in government, what do we have other than reputation? We don't have business to protect, really. We have the citizens of the state to protect. And we have the reputation because who else the citizens of the state going to deal with other than the state government? Where else are you going to go to get the DMV license or driver's license? You're going to go to DMV. And if you can't trust DMV, we got a real problem.
So reality check, you've got to manage expectations. You've got to tell the C-suite group and down that you don't have things covered. It's impossible to. There's not a state agency, federal agency, or local county, city that is impervious to cyber attack. So manage those expectations so that they're educated and aware that it may and can happen and probably will in the future. And it's your response that really is your job to be the expert out there. It's how you respond to the event. It's not blocking it because you're not going to block it. And that's the expectations. And make sure your enterprise understands that. Because if they don't, their expectations are going to be exactly what Mary just read off. And that's not a very good situation.
Yeah, the key word here is protect. I don't use security anymore. I don't secure anything. Why? Because in the mind's eye of my listener, when I say secure, that means pretty much 100%. Are we ever 100% when it comes to security? No, not even close, right? But I use the word protect, and the listener's ear, right, what they hear is, oh, I understand what protect means, right? It means there's some vulnerability there still, right? There is some risk, but it's protecting me, right? It's not securing me. So when you're talking to your senior executives and helping them understand what this thing we call security really is, it's really about protect. It's protecting the data, it's protecting the information, it's protecting the network. It's not securing the network. Because and oh, by the way, if you go in there and said, well, I'm going to upgrade to Windows 7 and secure all of our ills, in my opinion, you shouldn't be in the job.
It's a matter of minimizing the risk. You're not going to do away with it, and then mitigating the hit.
So your business continuity plan. This is a team effort. And you here are able to be prepared to champion the effort, but it require the business to weigh in on what they really need. If you can go offline and your business can carry on seeing patients or manning a service desk and with a walk-up situation, then that's great for business continuity because you may need some extra time to bring your network back online. But in this, we urge you to go ahead, react. What would you do? How would you react to a dedicated denial of service? Do you know who your network people are and if they even have capability, or would everybody be sitting around saying, wow, I can't log on? And would the worst thing is, would your customers be calling you and telling you that? Because if we do not have the power to determine something and our customers have to call us and report, we're not doing our jobs and we're not being effective. We need to plan for there's a possibility that we're going to have no internet. It may be our provider. So what can we do? How will we utilize call centers, a messaging system, some other form of communication out to people to let them know that something is being worked on? Presumably something's being worked on. Crypto locker and ransomware recovery. Again, what are your checkpoints for your backups? You want to make sure that you're not having corruption pervasive through your system, that you're really taking a look at intervals on your critical data and making sure that things aren't loaded. And a lot of this is awareness of our users. And many of them don't like it. Our training, the security training that we need to give is at all levels of the organization. And many times it's that executive who is in a number of different organizations and whose ego can be easily appealed to, that makes that one click. And we find that over and over again. And they weren't thinking, they thought, oh yeah, they know me because I'm important. And the next thing you know, they were the person that has that embarrassing incident happen. We could have an event where there's no email. So what are we going to do about that? What would our alternative be to email? Would we allow people to use their home email? Would we literally just not be able to receive any email for the duration? How would we deal with that? Mobile malware, that one we didn't even get into today, but again, a lot of this is how are you having developers develop your mobile device interfaces? Because they're very easy to develop nowadays, and they need to be secured in a more specific manner than you would with a regular web app. So there's a whole other layer there. And then considering your dependencies on the cloud, the state is really focusing more on how are we going to deal with the cloud providers? What constitutes the type of cloud that we need? It does start with your business. What are the business requirements, and where do you want to find that solution? Is it something that can be done in-house? Is it a hybrid solution that appears to be a cloud, but your infrastructure is nearby? Or are you going to throw in with a big company and have to have that additional level of trust and monitoring that is required for a successful cloud?
You know, I'd like to add something. We're talking about all these obvious situations here that could affect your business continuity, but the biggest threat is the undetected malware or undetected hacker that's in your system that's modifying your GIS data or modifying your web pages ever so slightly, or modifying other databases that are critical to your constituents. And so you really want to keep an eye out for those types of situations, because those are the worst things that can happen because you're not aware of it. And as an earthquake situation in Napa, multiple responders are dependent upon the GIS data, and that GIS data has been modified, and it's really hard to detect that. It could wreak havoc in a disaster recovery process.
So I want to thank our panelists, and I think we have time to go ahead and answer some questions for you. Here's our contact information that will be published with the slides. So for our cyber-dependent communities now, business continuity depends on cybersecurity resilience. Do we have questions? Any other stories that we want to?
So at yesterday's event where they were doing the cyber warning, they mentioned the possibility of, in the aftermath, perhaps shutting down particular systems either for forensics or for containing a particular threat. Do you guys do you have any recommendations for including documentation in business continuity plan for those types of events where it's not denial of service, it's more of a cyber theft, information being exfiltrated, something like that. And when do we make the decision in terms of shutting down key systems versus keeping them up? Anything that
You want to be a little careful about shutting down systems when you detect, because you cannot do forensics and find out what they've taken and all that. And if you make them aware that you're aware of it, they can root down deeper in or do other things to continue with their hack. A good path and documentation is at the msissac.org site. I highly recommend all of you hitting that site. It's an incredible amount of information for security and all that, but they do delve into exactly that situation. So you don't want to overreact. I know it sounds funny, but once they're in, you got to find out what data they're taking, and the whole bit you need to do forensics. And within a matter of an hour or two, FBI, MSISAC, and the state CISO will be helping you out and guiding you on what to shut down and what not to shut down. If it's not a hacking situation, if it's something that's going on in the environment from a global basis, one of my first things is to pull the ISP plug, pull the internet. And then look at what things are. You can easily get it back on, plug it back in, but, you know, you got it, if you start hearing stuff happening out in the internet and it isn't specific to your organization, by all means, pull the plug. Yeah.
What if it's a desktop or something that would just be a desktop, and the other person shut that down or not?
Even, again, detaching it from the network.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, I get a rogue machine going rogue on me. SOC notices it right away, and bank of computers that I assign that same IP address to that computer, to another computer. If you remember back to TCP 101, what happens to the original IP address? Gets kicked off the network, doesn't it? Right? So I just kick it off the network. Then I'll ask questions later. I could honestly care less who it is, right? I got to manage that, CEO and the like, but I have to manage that appropriately. That doesn't go without saying, right? But if the machine goes rogue on me at a PC level, individual client level, I kick it off the network. To the gentleman's question on the server side, if I've got a service that's operating, the last thing I'll never take that service down. I may move it off, but I have to maintain that service. Part of what Gary was saying is I want the bad actor to community to think they haven't had an impact, but I still have the forensics requirements that I have to do. So I've got to move that off somehow, and I will do that, but I'll never take that system down.
It's just a matter of denying access. You're creating a DDoS for your infiltrator, basically. You want to break that connection, get them out of there as quickly as possible, and let them try to roam around because they don't have any connection. They're running blind.
Just to get to the point, I think there are two types of cyber attacks. One is that activity is happening, and two is something that has already happened. So logging becomes an important part in that, and many times the CTO is going to say it takes too much space on the firewalls to keep the logs or whatever. So it's very important to, as an ISO, to talk to your CTO about what kind of logging we have in place.
And how long are you going to keep those logs?
Exactly.
And
That's-
get some tools to manage those logs.
Correct.
The better look that you have at your logs, the better integration you have, and the easier look that you have, the greater your chances are of finding these things early. The earlier you find them, the less logs you would need. But I mean, if somebody's been in your system for 6 months and you're only keeping a month's worth of logs, you have no way of knowing how they got in, where they've been. You're blind.
Who out here is an administrator that can actually get to server logs? Who's authorized? So you see how much stuff there is in there? It gets really confusing. With some of with Windows 2008 servers, they give you a chance to cut your logs into different slices so that you can zero in on them a little more. To me, when I started looking at those, I was kind of like, well, I'm better off with just one big chunk. So you want to take a look at your logs during the good times to make sure that you can actually interpret what they're saying and what all that information means, because it's a really lot of data when you see all the good transactions that go on too. Same thing with the network people. They need the time to be able to, there's logging, they need the time to enable it, to put it into a log management system if they don't have one already. Sometimes there are free ones, these kind of tools. And to conclude, we're talking about the business continuity here because this was the track that our committee has. But I urge you all to really think about what you would do with incident management in particular, because when we look at what constitutes this type of business continuity issue that would really be an emergency and we would need to rearrange our operations in order to continue business, but there can be a number of smaller incidents that lead up to it that need to be managed. And that is going to give you that correlation to determine when is it pervasive? When is this something that we all need to mobilize and do something about? It's not always going to be something that you can, as we were told, see, taste, or smell. It may be a total awareness where multiple people are calling you to report, and that's how you realize that these things are happening. Do we have any closing remarks and I thank you, panel, for giving us some reality checks here?
I got one closing remark. Patch, patch, patch.
Plan ahead. Plan put together a business plan, put together a technology recovery plan, and think about as much as you can think about. It's all a war out there, so you got to plan what your defenses are going to be.
Communicate, communicate, communicate. Communicate, communicate, and then when you think you've communicated enough, communicate some more.
Yep.
Right? You have to. You've got to. In this day and age, we in the security community can no longer think we're just doing this problem ourselves. We have to communicate with our business partners. We have to communicate with our ISPs and the like. You have to communicate.
Thank you, everybody. Enjoy the rest of the conference.